here for our program this afternoon, the Greensboro Massacre At 40 Lessons for Movement Building. I'm delighted and honored to introduce the moderator for this afternoon's event, Rosalind Pellis, who's here to my left. Roz has been a labor and freedom movement activist since the 1960s. She joined CORE at age 13 in her hometown of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She's currently the Vice President of Repairers of the Breach, which is a nonpartisan organization that seeks to build a progressive agenda and movement rooted in the values of justice, fairness, and the common good. She's also the Senior Strategic Advisor to the Poor People's Campaign. But in 1979, she was a member of the Communist Workers' Party and a union organizer in textile mills and hospitals in North Carolina, and saw her comrades murdered in the streets during the events of November 3rd, 1979, which became a dramatic turning point in her history as an organizer and will be the focus of our discussion with survivors of that event this afternoon. So we're fortunate to have Roz moderate and introduce the panelists for this session: Paul Bermanzon, Reverend Nelson Johnson, and Joyce Johnson. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Roz Pellis.
That's an unusual introduction for the moderator, and I love it.
Well deserved.
I'm so glad to be here and to be here among friends who run this absolutely wonderful place called the People's Forum. And I'm so glad to be here with new people, but especially my comrades and friends who are here tonight, many of whom I have not seen for 40 years. Or 30 years, and some that I actually did not know until tonight who were my comrades and friends. So I'm so happy to be here, and people keep coming in, and I think it's amazing. So this year marks the 40th anniversary of the Greensboro Massacre. On November 3rd, 1979 in Greensboro, a 9-car caravan of Ku Klux Klan and American Nazi Party members drove into Morningside Homes, a public housing project in the Black community, and opened fire on men, women, and children who were demonstrating, who were preparing to demonstrate, preparing for a rally, an anti-Klan rally and conference that was organized by the Communist Workers' Party, as well as with community organizers and folks from across the state. These murderers were filmed and documented by television cameras that were on the scene that day, but the Klan and the Nazis basically got away with murder scot-free. The true story of the Greensboro Massacre has mostly not been told, omitted from the history books and omitted from the history of the social justice movements in this country. And when it has been told, it's been told with a false narrative. A narrative that says that it was coming together of folks who were feuding, folks who were extremists. It was also, people have also said that it was a shootout. And the country suffers from both these false scenarios. For the nation, history that is not known or understood will be repeated. And for social justice movements and activists, there's no opportunity to learn from or to benefit from the lessons of those days. So we want to tell the story today. Today, from our panelists, you'll hear about and see exactly what happened on that day. You'll hear what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. And you'll also learn about the 5 folks who were murdered on that day. Our panelists are all survivors of the Greensboro Massacre and were members of the Communist Workers' Party. They were leaders then, and they are leaders now in the work that they do in various parts of the country. They have continued to fight. And they are my friends and people that I love. But before we hear from them, we have a short video to set the stage and the context for tonight's presentation. So if we can see the film.
This commission, with the will, the insight, the vision, the sensitivity and caring, to be that catalyst for truth, healing, and restorative justice in this community. What a blessed day.
On June 12, 2004, over 500 people gathered in Greensboro, North Carolina to witness the swearing in of the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States.
It is with great confidence in the people of Greensboro and in this citizen-led process that I charge you as Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners to carry out your work with honor, for much of the quality of the work you do will shape the quality of life in our city and beyond for years to come. God bless you.
I really did not fully appreciate the magnitude of the endeavor until I was standing in a room with all the people who came for the swearing in, and as I heard different representatives from the community in Greensboro talk about their hopes and their desires for us and for the truth and for reconciliation.
Installation of this commission was the culmination of nearly 5 years of work and planning by a group called the Greensboro Truth and Community Reconciliation Project. Initiated by survivors of a violent episode in Greensboro's past, guided by the National Advisory Board and the International Center for Transitional Justice, and propelled by the participation of a cross-section of Greensboro citizens called the Local Task Force. The project had crafted a selection process and a mandate for a commission independent of any external influence to examine the context, causes, sequence, and consequence of the events of November 3rd, 1979, and to issue a report to the Greensboro community.
When I first heard about the commission, I was excited about its potential for helping our community identify and heal some of the divisions that exist. And I realize a lot of folks in different parts of our community are not aware of those divisions or choose to believe they don't exist. But in my work dealing with racism and diversity and cultural conflict, I see every day evidence of those divisions.
On November 3rd, 1979, on a bright Saturday morning, a group of labor organizers assembled in Morningside Homes, a predominantly black housing project in Greensboro, for an educational conference and an anti-Klan march with the prominent slogan, "Death to the Klan." A caravan of 9 cars carrying Klan and American Nazi Party members drove to Greensboro to disrupt the march. As the caravan reached the housing project, words were exchanged and a confrontation ensued. The Klan and Nazis took guns from their cars and opened fire on the crowd. Killed. 10 others were wounded. Police did not arrive on the scene until several minutes after the shooting stopped, but news crews and photographers captured the event on film and videotape, and the images from Greensboro were soon broadcast around the world. In the state and federal trials that followed, 2 all-white juries found the Klan and Nazi members not guilty of any crimes. In 1985, a civil suit filed by the relatives of those killed on November 3rd was resolved with the finding that the Greensboro Police Department and members of the Klan and Nazi organizations were jointly liable for the wrongful death of one of the march participants. With a painful collective memory of tragic violence, Greensboro would sometimes prefer to leave the events of November 3rd, 1979, out of the telling of the city's proud history. The Greensboro Project is drawing inspiration and guidance from a number of truth and reconciliation processes around the world, the best known of which is South Africa.
You are going to be a crippled community, whether you like it or not. You are going to be a crippled community as long as you refuse to face up to your past.
A press conference and open house on January 25, 2005 marked the beginning of the public phase of the Commission's work. The Commission and its staff set up an office in downtown Greensboro, took statements from individuals, facilitated conversations with relevant stakeholders, held and participated in community events, conducted a door-to-door campaign, met with representatives from other truth commissions, including Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and launched a website, TV show, blog, and weekly newsletter. Even as the Commission set about its tasks, the need for its existence and integrity of its independence was the subject of ongoing debate in the media, the community, and at City Hall.
Motion to oppose the Truth and Reconciliation Program.
Okay. Not endorse, I guess.
To oppose.
To oppose. And that passes 6-3.
We will now bring this hearing to order. We thank everyone here for their willingness and openness to listen to the variety of viewpoints on traumatic events in our history.
Over the course of 3 public hearings held in Greensboro, 54 people spoke to the Commission about the events of November 3rd, their origins, and lasting impact.
The reason I came to Greensboro, they put the poster out. Death to the Klan. Said we was hiding under rocks, we were scum. I'm not scum, I'm as good as any man walking on this earth.
Gunfire, screams, gunfire, screams. Engines gunning as the shooters fled. And eerie silence. I could smell gunpowder in the air and heard the groaning of people who were dying.
You don't let 2 groups with extreme political views from each other come together without a buffer. And the buffer would have been the police. In my opinion, yes, we should have been there.
As soon as the shooting stopped and I realized that people were injured, I searched for Caesar and I found him dead. And I immediately knew that we had been set up.
After November the 3rd, the police treated us like we had committed the crimes, like we had killed the communist workers on November the 3rd. We were put on curfew. There were helicopters. There was tons of police. We were in a war zone. We were treated like prisoners in our own community.
My 2 children saw their Auntie Sandy with a bullet between her eyes and blood streaming down her face. This scene was permanently burned into the consciousness of my little girls. And when I hear establishment apologists with glib arrogance promote the absolutely false view that I planned a shootout and then trick the police, my blood boils as my soul rages.
You know, there are many people whose lives changed that day, changed to not trust in the system that's supposed to protect you, changed to, you know, a fear of many things, but that my life never changed. It started that way.
After 26 years, there are people who are still afraid of retaliation for speaking at the public hearings. How intimidating, how shocking when you get right down to it. I was extremely proud of the people who did consent to speak and presenting such different views, which is what we need, you know, and without that, we wouldn't have had the balance that we're able to come up with.
Nearly 2 years after taking their oaths, the the 7 members of the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission present their final report with findings and recommendations for the city.
On the morning of November 3rd, 1979, Klan and Nazi members headed for the parade starting point, intending to break the law, and came with an arsenal of weapons and heavy firearms. The heaviest burden of responsibility is on Klansmen and Nazis, who after an initial stick fight with demonstrators, returned to their cars, retrieved weapons, and fired at mostly unarmed demonstrators when the caravan's path of exit was cleared and they could have fled. We find that the Communist Workers' Party members did not seek or deserve to be killed. They did, however, underestimate the danger of taunting the Klan with provocative language and for beating on caravan cars with sticks. The primary contributor to the loss of life was the absence of police, which endangered the welfare of all involved, including residents of Morningside homes where the shootings took place. Nearly all commissioners believe that the police absence was the result of some intentionality on the part of at least some officers in the Greensboro Police Department. Paid police informant and Greensboro Klansman Eddie Dawson played a leadership role in bringing the Klan and Nazis into contact with the Communist Workers' Party. Despite knowledge of Dawson's actions and other intelligence that violence was likely, police made decisions to give Dawson a copy of the parade permit, not to warn demonstrators about the supremacist plans, not to be anywhere near the scene, not to accompany the caravan in a noticeable way, not to monitor the situation using hand radios, and not to stop fleeing cars after the tragedy. City officials endeavored to protect the city's image by attempting to distance Greensboro from the underlying issues that contributed to the event. The city's elected officials and managers responded to the tragedy by clamping down on citizen protests in the interest of security through tactics such as curfews, National Guard presence, public service announcements, obstruction surveillance, and intimidation of subsequent protests. The verdicts in the 3 trials conflicted with what seems to be a common sense assessment of wrongdoing based on the videotape, resulting in a greater distrust of the justice system. A flawed system of jury selection created all-white juries, unrepresentative of the community, contributing to the acquittals. We found that the events of November 3rd, 1979 are woven through with issues of race and class. Our report discusses underlying issues including racial and economic justice, white supremacy, and the failure of the police and justice system to provide equal protection to all residents.
We've worked together for 2 years and did the public hearings, and now we have a report which is several hundreds of pages. But I still see it only as a part of the work, in fact, a small part of the work, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done by the community, starting with putting the effort to understand what really happened, and to look at our findings and to look at our recommendations, agree, disagree, question, critique, do everything that a healthy, critical community would do, but get engaged.
My greatest hope is that the west side of Greensboro and the east side of Greensboro will come together and at least talk like we had to do as commissioners, because that's what happened at that table. Different parts of this city came together. We had struggle, but we still respect each other.
That's the lesson I think to draw from this. It's not just about 7 people who struggled through over a 2-year period. We are a part of a process that involves a lot of people. And that is what it's gonna take to be able to try to make real the recommendations that we're putting forward in this report.
I believe we've learned a lot from the past. And I'm hopeful that we can change the future for the better.
No one is ever going to be able to heal every wound, nor will any commission anywhere be able to bring complete reconciliation. But every step toward healing and every step toward reconciliation makes each community and the nation as a whole that much stronger and that much better. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished. And I'm thankful that a lot of communities around the U.S. are looking at us for leadership as a model to follow.
First, let me introduce Joyce Hobson Johnson. She lives in Greensboro, North Carolina. She also has been a social justice activist since high school. She's the co-executive director of the Beloved Community Center, a community organizing, leadership development, research, and advocacy organization. She's the co-chair of the National Council of Elders, which includes leaders of social justice movements of the 20th century, and is a national leader of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Next, I'd like to introduce Paul Bermanzon on the end to my left. Paul is the son of Jewish survivors of the Nazi Holocaust. He went to the City College of New York, where he was active in the anti-war movement. He went to medical school in North Carolina at Duke, where he was radicalized and became a revolutionary. Paul survived being shot in the head at the massacre. He went on to a career as a psychiatrist, from which he is now retired. Since retirement, Paul tells me he's discovered that he's a historian who has been trapped in the body of a psychiatrist. We'll hear more about that. And he remains an active revolutionary in the Hudson Valley, where he lives with his wife, Sally. Finally, on our panel is Reverend Nelson Johnson. He is the founding and now retired pastor of Faith Community Church in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the co-executive director of the Beloved Community Center. He is a longtime social justice advocate and activist dating over many decades, longer than me, guided by his multiple emphasis on faith, equity, justice, diversity, and democracy. Reverend Johnson is actively building relationships and providing leadership among faith groups, organized labor, and community organizers in Greensboro, across the South, and really across the nation. Reverend Johnson is a North Carolina native and was also wounded on November 3rd. So this, folks, is our panel for tonight, and I look forward to hearing from them. We'll now get a chance to hear more about the why, how, who, and what happened on that day and the days before it and after it. And at the end of that time, we'll take questions and have a discussion. So let's start with hearing from Nelson.
Thank you. First, I want to thank each of you and all of you for coming out this afternoon. No matter how many times I have seen this footage, it tugs on my heart when I realize the wonderful lives that were snuffed out that day. And even worse than that, the impossibility, even with the Truth Commission, of understanding the depth of what happened in Greensboro, North Carolina. So my task is to say in a simplified way what happened, and Roz has given me 7 minutes to do that. I try to be faithful. On November 3rd, 1979, was a very warm and foggy morning in Greensboro. And by about 10 o'clock, the fog was lifting, and it turned into a beautiful sunny morning. I had just had breakfast with Jim Waller, not knowing this would be the last time that we had breakfast together, and his wife, Signe. And I drove to the march site. About 50 people had gathered there And we expected around 150 people from around the state, various factories and organizers, and in Southern Virginia. We were putting placards on sticks and loading bongos on a flatbed truck that we had rented, because our vision was to have a beautiful march that wound through the African American community, the black community, where I had worked for nearly 15 years. And as that 50 or 150 people walked behind the truck, and we would be singing songs and inviting people to join the march, because we were marching to a conference site where the obscenity of racism and to use to devalue people and pit people against each other would be engaged. And you know, if you start with about 150 people, in the marches that we have had in our city, you end with about 300 people. And there we would have this conversation. Our vision was to have a powerful labor community conference of black and white workers from various industries, particularly the textile industry, and to bring together the black community, which had been my work for the last 14 or 15 years. And I saw this day as potentially the most successful gathering that we had had in our 15 years in Greensboro, including my student days in organizing the Student Organization for Black Unity. So about 11:18 that morning, no police were there. I was waiting for Lieutenant Hampton. I secured the parade permit. I shook his hand, and they said they would be there, but there were no police there. Who did arrive was a caravan of 9 Klan and Nazi vehicles. And Joyce will explain a little later in more detail how this happened. After a brief stick fight that you saw, some shouting back and forth, the last caravan car stopped about a half a football field from where the crowd of 50 was gathered, and took from their trunks, slowly took from their trunks, long weapons and aimed at seemingly particular people. And I want to call their names again. William Bill Sampson, the leading organizer at the largest denim producing factory in the world, East White Oak, shot through the heart and died on the scene. Cesar Cosce, a Latino brother organizing non-academic employees and other workers in Durham and around the state, shot through the heart and died on the scene. Dr. Michael Nathan, a medical doctor practicing at a black hospital in Durham, shot flush in the face with a shotgun and lay bleeding in the street and died 2 days later from his wound. A dear friend that I call my sister, Sandy Smith, beautiful young black woman, former student government president at Bennett College, shot between the eyes as she was trying to get the children out of the line of fire, including my 2 daughters who were 7 and 8. My sister in the movement was just brutally shot down, and to this day, I believe she took the bullet intended for me. I don't have time to go into that right now, but Jim Waller, the elected president of the Haw River Textile Workers Union, was shot in the back and died in my arms as I turned his body over. At that point, I, as the person who secured the parade permit, pushed into signing a document that we would not be armed, that was given to the Klan within minutes after it was given to us. I stood up and proclaimed with all the energy in my body that this could not have happened without the collusion of the police. At which time the police finally showed up and demanded that I shut up. And I said, I'm not going to shut up. They arrested me and charged me with fomenting a riot after the Klan had killed 5 friends, wounded 10 others, and terrorized the black community. I was jailed without a bond for one night because they said that if I got out, it would be too dangerous because I would go around and organize a riot. I did not know while I was in jail who was dead. I was taken to the hospital for a non-life-threatening wound, stabbed through the arm by a Nazi. And later that night, 2 men, one identified himself as an FBI agent and the other one as a Greensboro police officer, and they said, Johnson, your name is on the lips of every Klansman in North Carolina, and your only possibility of leading a good life is going to be working with us. I turned my seat to the wall. I was sitting on a little stool, and they said, we will rip these GD bandages off of your arm if you. I never said a word. I just sat there. And beloved, this is an oversimplified, brief way of saying what happened. The more profound question is, why did it happen? How did it happen? And so I'm going to, my 7 minutes up? I'm going to invite my beloved wife of 50 years to speak to the question of how it happened.
Thank you, Nelson, and thank you all of you for
Could I just say this, George, before you get started?
Go right on.
This is a copy of the Truth Commission report. That is a story in itself that we don't have time to fully go through. I got it upside down. Take another picture. But I want you to know that a lot of work was put into trying to bring the hostile elements in this community to some place, a possible conversation. That work is still going on.
Yes. So again, thanks for having us. This is so important to us personally, but those of us who believe in freedom, and increasingly for our entire nation during the times that we are living in. And we hope that the few things that we share here will make a difference in how we move forward as a nation. You know, you plant these seeds and look forward to them growing beautiful fruit. So the question I've been given is, how did this happen? But first I want to say again, just summarizing what it was. It was a state-facilitated North American Death Squad. State-facilitated North American Death Squad, actively organized by the Greensboro Police Department, the BATF, and the FBI. It was an example of COINTELPRO at its height. The collusion between corporate forces, anti-union forces, mainstream media, a false narrative that pits one race against another. It was that narrative that says that poor people are poor because we're lazy or don't deserve it or whatever. All of this was happening in a relatively small town in the South, Greensboro, North Carolina. And this happened to protect that status quo that's so economically and socially oppressive. Yet there we were, you've seen a few of us here now, and all of our diversity and youthfulness and determination. I just tell the story a lot about the fact that we had meetings of something called the Trade Union Educational League. We didn't have those wonderful machines so that you have now. So we'd be in different corners of the room translating from Spanish, from Vietnamese, from all different languages so that our different folks could hear. We were really the sons and daughters of immigrants of that time, of African Americans of that time, striving to make this country better. It was a coming together of a racist forces of government to squash an emerging movement of working class and community organizers. But then how did a band of Klan and Nazis, known historically as night riders where we're from in the South, and white nationalists from Germany come into an all-black neighborhood in broad daylight and commit murder? An assassination of 5 people, the wounding of 10 others, and terrorizing of a neighborhood called Morningside, a place that had 400 units packed in there. And y'all are used to some of that in New York, but in the South, we're used to being able to spread out. But I knew folks in all those units because I would leaflet there and interact with folk and invite them to different gatherings about housing, about education, whatever. You know, just teeming with beautiful, at that point, all black kids. So let's retrace just a few facts. One is that we had filed, particularly Nelson, for a parade permit. And typically that took maybe up to 72 hours, 3 days. But after 10 days, we had no permit. And we've been organizing because we weren't just in Greensboro, we were in places like New York. I see some of y'all out there now. But in North Carolina, Rocky Mount, Durham, Charlotte, Chapel Hill, Salisbury, Kannapolis, 5 textile mills in Greensboro, in the neighborhoods where we worked. And so there we were with no permit, with a crowd of organizers coming from all over the state and nearby places like Danville and Martinsville. It was like inviting some of your good friends to your house and you didn't have the collard greens and the cornbread ready for them. I mean, we just had to have this thing set up. As Nelson said, this was going to be a grand coming together, talking about, at that point, primarily black and white workers getting together and making a difference where we lived, addressing questions of education and all that. So being organizers, when we didn't have the permit, we got to work. We called a press conference and demanded that we get this parade permit, which was a democratic right. I should mention here that in North Carolina, it was and still is legal to openly carry weapons. They could not be concealed. Yet, when we finally got that parade permit after pressure, the Greensboro Police Department had placed on there that we could not carry weapons, concealed otherwise. It was like, well, why are you raising that? We didn't intend to carry weapons in our demonstration, but we upheld the right to self-defense. But at the same time they finally gave us the parade permit, they also gave it to the Klan and Nazis, we found out, really within minutes. So the Klan and Nazis had formed something called the United Racist Front. As far as we know, the first time that the Klan and Nazis had gotten together, but they got together to stop this emerging movement, supported by BATF and others. Though we were not allowed to even officially have weapons, these Klan and Nazis, 9 carloads as Nelson said, came to our march, which was a legally called march, which was supposed to have the protection of the police, loaded down with an arsenal of weapons. Eddie Dawson, who was a key informant for the local police and for some of the federal agencies, actually became frightened during the latter days of their organizing and went to police and said, you know, you need to call this thing off, it's dangerous. These folk have all these weapons, because they really were not calling all the shots that we found. There really were these governmental agencies, and the police refused to counsel it. Emily Mann, who's a playwright, interviewed him at one point, and he actually had said to the police, what do you want me to do, bring you a bucket of blood before you believe it? And we knew nothing of this, but in fact more than a bucket was filled and lives were lost. Most importantly, the police didn't even tell us, and then they were not there. They did not come. They said they didn't know where it was. We were lying to them about where the parade was starting. But on the morning of November 3rd, 1979, police, in fact, one of their operatives called Rooster Cooper, literally filmed Klan and Nazis as they loaded the weapons into that ninth car right near the Waffle House on Ranneman Road, drove 5 miles across town. He actually had pictures. They came out in court of them loading these concealed weapons, but no arrests were made, no notice to the demonstrators. But as I said, worst of all was they withdrew their personnel. They were sent, the tactical squad was supposedly sent to lunch early. They said they were confused about the starting place. And of course, we had some naivete about relying on the police doing their job. But they were doing their job. Yes. So as we marchers worked to set up, the caravan came in. I won't go back over all. You've seen aspects of it. As Nelson said, our children were there. I think your kids were there, Roz. I can't remember.
They were supposed to.
Yeah. And the result were 5 beautiful people, hard-working people for the people, were killed. 10 were wounded. Paul and Nelson were among those. So we'll talk more about this if we have time, about any details you want to hear about. So we were really hit hard on that day as the Workers' Viewpoint Organization, later renamed the Communist Workers' Party. But it also hit revolutionary and progressive forces beyond our organization. And I see some of you out there as well. A pause was inserted in this growing movement that we were building. A green light was given to those oppressive forces that are designed to suppress the people's movement. The good news is that we were not crushed. We're still here.
That's right.
And the fight back is a term that's used a lot, but it's really more still building for us, building community, building that sense of possibility for now our grandchildren. And I'll end with saying again, it's wonderful to share this story with you, and I hope that just something that I've said will inspire you to continue going on. Though trials come on every hand, feel like going on. Thank you.
Take care, man.
So I'm going to talk about why we were hit. And I also have 7 minutes. Since we're talking about lessons from Greensboro, I'd suggest an important lesson that should be learned is if you are pressed for time, you shouldn't assign an old guy to tell war stories. I think it's, but I'll be disciplined about this. Why were we hit? We were hit because we were successfully organizing campaigns to end capitalism. There was a story the media tried to sell that we wanted to be killed because we were failing in our work and we needed martyrs to promote the cause. This was plastered all over the media for years, and it still appears in those rare occasions where there's some reference back in the media to what happened in Greensboro on November 3rd, 1979. Fake news is not new. Most of all, we worked in textile mills and hospitals across the state. We brought together black, white, and Latino and other workers to struggle side by side for improvements in our conditions. This formed the basis for our struggle against racism. It wasn't just moralistic lectures. We were really fighting to build a society that's equal, when people are treating one another with respect. And in the course of the struggle, you can see that developing day by day as people work together for a common cause. And some of the more amazing things were to see some of these folks who had been raised in a very racist, white supremacist family and atmosphere, really seeing the basic lesson of all the work that we were doing, which is no one group can do what needs to be done alone.
That's right.
We really need to bring us all together. And by doing that, we were really effectively striking powerful blows against racism in the United States in a very meaningful way, I think. We built weak unions into strong ones, and we started new unions where there were none. We were very concrete in what we did. Throughout it, we were strong in our advocacy for a new society, the need to end capitalism. We were constantly showing how the problems that we face day to day, which we were fighting on, really grew out of the basic organization of society into makers and takers, the makers being the people who produce, and the takers being the people who appropriate or take the fruit of the labor of the people who produce. We were proud and open communists. We were wide open. We did not hesitate to discuss our views in a powerful way. We actually got quite good at it. Our people were leaders of their locals, and the people killed were outstanding leaders. Jim Waller, a textile worker, was re-elected president of his local after he was fired from his job at Hoare River Mills. He was fired because he didn't say on his application that he was a doctor. When he was fired, the workers said, as bad as conditions are in this plant, we need a doctor in here. So they tried to portray it as the kind of thing where he lied, oh, bad guy. But workers could see very clearly through that. Sandy Smith, also a textile worker, organized a union at Revolution Mills. She routinely gathered 75 workers for meetings, and the campaign was kept a secret for months. Now that is some tight organizing. Yes, thank you. So she was applying for a job at Cone Mills, the largest concentration of textile workers in the US, maybe in the world, when she was killed. And there was an ongoing union struggle at Cone Mills that had been going for a number of years. And Sandy was looking forward to jumping in and helping out. Bill Sampson, also a textile worker, was considered a shoo-in for president of his local when he was killed. Cesar Cauce, a hospital worker, traveled across the state during the strike wave of 1978. He wrote honest articles about what was happening and spoke at rallies to promote unionization from Winston-Salem to Morehead City, from the mountains to the ocean. Cesar was also a leader in the campaign to unionize Duke University Medical Center and a favorite speaker at rallies of unionizing poultry workers in Durham. Mike Nathan, a revolutionary doctor, supported hospital workers organizing for safe conditions in Durham hospitals. And he also led a campaign to raise much-needed medical supplies for the Zimbabwean Revolution. The leaders of the Zimbabwe African National Union came to Durham to meet with him. He was a very important part of the revolutionary struggle in Southern Africa and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical supplies to send to ZANU. And ZANU understood this was important. This was a real struggle. These were not failures looking to die to enhance their cause. They weren't looking to martyr themselves. They were too engaged in the struggles, too young and energetic to die. They were killed because they were successfully organizing. They were killed, as Joyce said, because the police were doing their job. It was all about trying to crush this movement because it was growing and it had real potential. And it wasn't just us. It wasn't just us. There were all these other groups. There was a whole new communist movement around the United States. There was a lot of people doing terrific work in the 70s. Terrific stuff. Really outstanding folks that were doing similar things to what we were doing. We're, of course, very proud, and we know the most about our own folks. But there was a lot of wonderful people that were doing similar things. We were hit in part to hit that whole movement. We were hit to hit the new communist movement, to hit the labor movement.
That's right.
And to hit the black liberation movement.
That's right.
That was what the targets were. It wasn't just us. I mean, it can be very egotistically gratifying to think we were such a big deal, but we were a small part. We were drops in a major rainstorm that was gathering, and it was building to produce major changes in the United States that the police, and particularly the FBI, are designed to prevent. Their job is to protect the status quo, to protect the existing order, and to make sure that nothing like what we were working on could succeed. They felt they had let it go far enough. That's my view of a big part of what happened. And we didn't confine our efforts to the workplace. We took seriously being tribunes of the people. Wherever there was a grievance, we picked up struggles, and here too we were successful at it. When North Carolina announced it would institute a competency test for high school students to graduate, one of the first high-stakes tests in the nation, we went on TV to announce we were going to stop the test by any means necessary. Yes. And we held dozens of actions at high schools where hundreds of students came out to stop the test. We'd have 4 people with signs come up as school was letting out, and in minutes there'd be 300 people on a picket line. I've never seen anything like it, before or since. Parents supported us like crazy. We went out to a meeting in Washington County in rural North Carolina, way in the eastern part of the state by the ocean. We were hours late, we were lost. This was before cell phones. So we finally got to the place where the meeting was going to be held, hours late. If I remember correctly, it was close to 10 o'clock. There was still over 100 people there waiting. That was an indication of the kind of interest that the fight to stop the test aroused. The governor went on TV 3 times to denounce us and to warn people not to pay attention to the struggle that we were organizing. He massively increased our visibility and support. And he knew it, and he didn't know what to do about it. But that's the power of when people really begin to see what's happening and begin to move together to change it. When racist shopkeeper Joe Judge killed black agricultural worker Charlie Lee in the tiny hamlet of Whitakers, North Carolina, for complaining that he, Charlie Lee, had been shortchanged by Judge, we were invited to build a campaign for justice because of the success in the campaign against the competency test. People knew about us, and we were invited to help after Charlie Lee was killed. We held rallies and marches, and we chanted, "The only solution is socialist revolution," in front of the Nash County Courthouse. I'm telling you. And sheriffs stood there looking baffled. But we continued in this, and the support grew, and Joe Judge was forced by the courts to pay blood money to Charlie Lee's widow. It was the first time in anyone's memory that a white killer was punished for killing a black man in North Carolina. It was a singular success. This is the kind of things that they were saying were failures. From their perspective, of course, they're failures because they point out the failures of the system. But they were successes from the standpoint of people struggling for a better society. They were very prominent successes in my view. We also helped to build the African Liberation Support Committee, which held large demonstrations in Washington, D.C., supporting liberation fighters in Southern Africa. 20 years later, after our people were killed in Greensboro, we set up the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission in North America, which you just heard a little bit about. It was modeled on the South African Truth Commission, and the South African Commission sent Reverend Bongani Finka, a member of their commission, to help guide ours. He said he was in Greensboro because you made our struggle your struggle. Still gets to me. But that's what it was. It was not just we were doing something just for ourselves. It was part of a whole global fight for a new kind of society, a new way to do things. And again, I want to emphasize, we were hit because there was this wonderful series of movements that were happening throughout the country that we took a lot of strength and inspiration from. The the new communist movement, which we were, I confess, quite sectarian in many ways, and we did not get along. We had lots of debates that were too furious and ignored the fundamental similarities. I certainly wouldn't do everything the same way today. That's another discussion, perhaps. The new communist movement, the labor movement, and the black liberation movement, which really had a center in Greensboro. A lot of wonderful things were happening. Nelson and Joyce were deeply involved in that from way before I got involved in this stuff. And this is why we were hit. We didn't invite the Klan to kill us. That's preposterous. I mean, it's not even laughable. It's absurd. It's outrageous. So these are a few of the war stories. I could go on, but I won't. We were hit not because we wanted to die. We were hit because we were successfully building a mass movement to end capitalism and replace it with a different kind of society, whether we call it socialism or a beloved community. We were looking to build a society where people are treated with respect, something that's sorely missing in today's America. So don't pay attention to the lying media. Pay attention to the grassroots struggles you're organizing, and organize. Make a mighty river. That was one of our beautiful slogans.
Amen.
Thank you very much. What we listened to is the true story of Greensboro that has not been told fully in 40 years. And so today we tried to do that.
I feel like going on. I feel like going on. The trials come on every hand. I feel like going on. Join me if you can. I feel like going on. I feel like going on. The trials come on every hand. I feel like going on. I've sung that song many times, and I continue to have it. Rob, before we continue with your excellently laid out program, I'd like to just call the names. I'd like to just call the names of our 5 comrades and friends and say presente.